Hello, everybody. We're here for another Block Insider podcast series. Again, there's 6 podcasts that are coming out, put on by the SKALE network. And we're having fun talks talking about where the industry is going, what's happening in crypto, and what's happening in the Ethereum ecosystem. So with me today is Spencer Noon from DTC Capital. I think one of the most knowledgeable and forward-thinking investors in the space. And really excited to have Spencer here today.
Thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, Jack, I'm happy to be here.
All right. So my introduction to Spencer was actually through Medium. Spencer's been writing very interesting, thought-provoking, kind of forward-thinking things since, I guess the first post I read was from 2014, which people probably thought he was absolutely crazy. And there were probably like 20 people reading what he had to say, but a lot of the things he's been talking about are becoming a reality. So really awesome to have you here today, Spencer. Maybe with that in mind, you could tell people a little bit more about your background, how you got into crypto, and a little bit more about, this, how you've been seeing the playing field before things come together, which is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started in crypto in 2014. I started a Bitcoin ATM company. And I was, extremely interested with all the different applications that you could do with Bitcoin, right? I was watching videos from people like Andreas Antonopoulos, and they were talking about what you could do on the Lightning Network and side chains and all of these amazing ecosystems that you could build on this base layer of value. And over the years, what we found was that it just didn't really go as planned. The amount of development that was happening on top of the Bitcoin ecosystem was pretty stagnant. And it was basically a function of the expressiveness of Bitcoin as a blockchain. It's really, really secure. And there are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins. And that's really because you can't do a lot with it. And then Ethereum comes along. And for me, as a person who actually was a Bitcoin maximalist for a little bit, I said, I don't think this is ever going to work. And slowly but surely, the traction and the adoption that the Ethereum community showed, it got too big to ignore. And so I became totally captivated by it, consumed by it. And it didn't take long for me to kind of wrap my head around the implications of what this could do. And so, yeah, I think that pretty much caused me to start DTC Capital. We started the fund in January 2018. And we're basically a crypto native fund that invests across the broad spectrum of crypto assets. So, Bitcoin and Ether, all the way down to, and where we spend a lot of our time in early stage, like seed stage investing. So working with the next crop of crypto founders that could someday be the next Vitalik or maybe even the next Satoshi. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So let's that's a good segue into the next thing I want to ask you about is Ethereum. So Ethereum, I think, really picked up its broad visibility in 2017, and obviously there was a token appreciation that happened, but what we saw was mass adoption amongst developers, and I think people that are just watching price aren't really as a part of the story. And for more context, I see Spencer at majority of these ETH hackathons around the world, like really seeing firsthand what's happening from a developer perspective. And so my question to you is, in the short term, people typically overestimate what can be done. And so everyone is saying it's 2020, 3 years after 2017, how come we're not like all living in a decentralized utopia? Well, we're not yet. And so if you could kind of give some more color for people why we're not there yet, but also where you think we can go in the next 7 years, so that really is this 10-year horizon from a lot of people had their introduction to a very early space.
Yeah. So I think in 2017, we had this period of almost irrational exuberance where we figured out these crypto economic and crypto primitives that we could put together and make applications. And we just began just imagining all the different possibilities. And, you had a number of companies being funded, projects, et cetera. But I think once those projects started to actually build, they realized that there were so many more, I think, just really issues and problems that they ran into related to kind of the usability of blockchains. And so I think, yeah, we myself included, all thought that this would be here a lot sooner, right? And I think what we do have though is we've got a bunch of we've got a lot of infrastructure that can support the next generation of applications someday. So what I'm trying to say is the last 3 years were not all for naught. We created some really amazing things, and now it's basically about putting those together, hardening them up, and just kind of augmenting the existing ecosystem with a few more things. And we can get into those if you'd like, that I think are pretty critical to unlocking mass adoption. I think Ethereum has always started as a developer first protocol, and I think it'll continue to grow that way. But when we talk as, like, investors about crossing the chasm to the mainstream, it's going to start really relying on the needs of users a lot more too. And that's honestly where I think SKALE fits in, and was a big part of our thesis when we did the investment.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, so an interesting thing to me is I kind of think about these things as like they're fruit on the tree, and there's different use cases, and there's some use cases that are pretty simple but incredibly valuable. And I think we're actually seeing a huge proliferation of these use cases. And one we like to call DeFi, decentralized finance DeFi, and make it incredibly complex. But at its core, it's a simple thing where people can get loans and other people can collateralize loans and get more return. And so what we have is savings accounts and loan structures. And it's something that banks, as a set of middlemen with brick and mortar, have been doing for a long time and extracting massive fees. And so we're seeing that come into play. And be interesting to hear your perspective on, hey, we already have this burgeoning DeFi zone, but that's the mechanics of that pretty simple in terms of what the technology can offer. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then also, like, what's next? What's the next fruit on the tree?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. Yeah. So I'm always reminded by there's this old Jeff Bezos video where, like, it must be in 1997. Amazon is an early company, and someone like finds him on the street. It might have been a news reporter, and they just say, Jeff, why did you come up with Amazon, like books? That seems like a pretty weird thing to and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, to create for on the web. And he had this amazing response. He basically said that a bookstore was the first best application for the internet, because when you think about the problems with the physical bookstores out there, you can only have so many books. And when you put something like a book catalog on the web, you can distribute those books all over the world and ship them to people depending on when they order it. And I thought that was brilliant, and it really maps perfectly to how I think about DeFi. DeFi right now, like you said, is about core financial primitives, things that you can do in finance using the blockchain. And yeah, it's a checkings account, it's a savings account, it's making a loan, it's investing. It's really all these basic tools that you and I have here in the United States. But actually, if we're being completely honest, people all over the world don't have that. And so I think there is an enormous amount of opportunity to see what happens when we give tools like that to everyone. But it's really so much more than that, because it's totally permissionless. Anyone can come in and build with this stuff. You don't need a bank or a financial institution to give you API access, or you need to be accredited or anything like that. And the assets that we're dealing with they're truly property. They're digital bearer instruments on the blockchain. So if I have it, I really have it, and no one can take it away from me. It can't be seized by the government. No one can come in and say, you no longer own this because the law says this. Well, on DeFi, code is law. When I own an asset in my account, it is my property. And I think that's just an absolutely amazing primitive that we've never seen on the internet. And so when I think about what comes next, there's so much. I really do believe that everything will be on blockchains in some way, shape, or form in the future as these systems get more efficient, scalable, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the next kind of place that we go is bringing financialization to other asset classes, to other categories that never could access financialization before in their lives. So I think things like gaming and art and digital art are ones that really come to mind. People are using in the NFT space, but there's so many other examples where, imagine if I could take a loan out against this asset that I have that's, on Fortnite. You probably wouldn't ever think of doing that because it doesn't make any sense, because what can I do with this? But when you realize that that asset is truly yours, it transforms everything. And so yeah, I think if you have like two sides of the spectrum, DeFi, and then like the rest of crypto applications, I can really see the lines becoming blurred like pretty quickly, because everything is going to become finance.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. And if you think about this, like let's just talk about a savings account and a loan structure. Okay. Like these are things that are very clear, and people are like, obviously if I live in a place where I can't get access to loans and banks that are secure outside of the United States or other major economic areas, and that's very clear value. But even just looking at like someone living in California, why would they do it? Well, guess what? Your bank account right now is probably giving you, with the current rates, about less than 1%, like 0.35 to 0.07% APY. And you could be getting like a 6, 7, 8% return in decentralized finance because on a savings account. And that alone, it's like, guess what? The protocol does the work. The fees don't go to all the humans that go work and really take a big cut because we're letting them store our money for us, right? And giving us a little return. So
and I think that's so well put. And I think it really underscores why I think this will win long term, this category, DeFi over CeFi, because the cost of capital in decentralized finance is so much lower, right? We're replacing institutions and people and brick and mortar and energy and everything with smart contracts. It's night and day. And so when the technology catches up from an infrastructure perspective, and like I said before, we're getting really, really close to have these like initial mainstream things. It's no question. And so, at the end of the day, there are people on the sides of these transactions. You need a bot, you need a lender, you need a borrower, right? But if they're working on top of crypto rails, I think it stands to reason that without that rent seeking, without that, infrastructure that you have to pay for, it's going to be better for both sides on DeFi.
And I actually am a believer that we'll have more jobs created out of this. This isn't like, let's put the humans out of work. It's the transformation of what work is and how people work. And people are going to find more businesses. And the thing is, they just end up creating more and more value where value gets commoditized in just this basic service component. It then can grow to higher order areas. And which brings up kind of the next question I have is so on one hand, we have something very simple, clearly defined. The other one is there's this world of use cases we haven't seen yet. And you start talking about how decentralized finance starts becoming an integrated component of all of these other Web3 categories. And I think when we talk about overestimating short-term and underestimating long-term, it's because things happen in the long run and humans are creative and inventive. And all of a sudden we have these new tools and abilities and network effects, and then new things happen. And that's where we underestimate. So curious if you could weigh in a little bit more on that side. Like, what do we not see coming yet that's going to hit us in the face and we're all going to start using this?
Yeah. So I think this is a really challenging question. It's hard to predict the future when you're dealing with emergent things, right? So like, back in the 90s, very tough to tell you that we wouldn't have more than like newspapers on top of the web. Social networks, for example, were that emergent thing. We have all these people talking to each other, connecting, and the new businesses and value that was captured because of that. I think it's very similar here. But when I think about some of the things that we definitely need, aside from financial services, I think it's like if we really want to generalize, it's probably applications that don't require or that kind of supersede having institutions, whether that's governments, big organizations, or other people that could censor a platform. With crypto, you're getting applications that are truly community owned and operated. And I think that's the key unlock for these systems. Because like I was saying before, these are digital bearer instruments. We control the network. The applications that we create will also be under user control. And so, this is a really lazy comparison, but like imagine Facebook truly run by its users. It probably wouldn't work in practice, but you kind of get what I'm saying, where you have these transcendent applications where ownership is a key primitive.
Yeah, I actually do think, my crazy belief is that in the next 7 years, the search engines we use for the internet, the advertising platforms, the social networks we use are going to all start becoming community owned. And whether that be centralized companies start like chopping off ownership and giving it to community through trustless manners, or purely decentralized entities come in and start eating up market share for bigger entities, like both directions are going to converge together, because what you get in return for giving up power as an entity is growth, right? And the users want more. And once it becomes apparent and easy to access, it becomes a reality.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to thread the needle for these like large incumbents, because you have this innovator's dilemma where Facebook and Twitter and these other companies, we're talking billions of dollars here overall in revenue. Where why would you change if you can continue doing this? The incentives that are in place for the people who run these organizations, it doesn't exactly make sense. And I think we'll see a lot of approaches where it's kind of haphazard, right? It's like, not to say I don't love what Reddit's doing. I think it's a worthwhile experiment. But do I think that having tokens for different Reddit communities, which if people haven't saw this news, this was recently announced, they're going to be piloting this with a couple of their different subreddits. I'm not sure how much that value is going to unlock. I don't really know how much Reddit users are going to care that they have a coin, and how that coin will be used, and if it's going to meaningfully affect things like their user experience. I'm actually a little bit skeptical. But when you architect something that's community owned and operated from the ground up, and the network effects of participating in those new ecosystems also have economic alignment, then you actually get really big really quick if you find that right kind of recipe. And so we'll have to see. It's going to be an amazing battle. And actually a really good microcosm of this battle, or example, I should say, is between Bitcoin and dollars, right? The government versus, non-sovereign fiat money. Which wins? We'll have to see, but it's going to be a really fun next couple of years.
Yeah. So one thing I think has been absolutely clear to me since, I fully joined the space in 2017 and started working on the whole scaling and user experience issue we're just broken from the perspective of opening up new use cases until we fix core infrastructure. And hey, this is nothing anyone should feel bad about. I worked in mobile, and in 2005 we had an app platform at Good Technology, and guess what? We had very low usage because we still had the low battery life and device power and device memory, and we were on 2G instead of 5G, right? So all these things they come together, and then things change and new use cases open up. So you have, I think, a very good perspective on what's happening, what the gating factors have been, and would love to kind of get more of your thoughts on, these systems and infrastructure improvements and even maybe getting into like you have ETH killers versus the Ethereum ecosystem and scaling additions to core Ethereum.
Yeah, no, this is like definitely a really meaty topic, and so I think maybe I would first start by talking about why we invested with SKALE, because I think it is like a really critical kind of extension of the Ethereum ecosystem that is worth addressing. And I think it's really interesting. What we've seen is that over the last 3 years, Ethereum has solidified itself as the platform for kind of decentralized applications. Now, you could say that there are other platforms with more users, or there are higher transactions per second, or anything that you want to. But if you really look at this stuff and you look at where the talent is, the developers are, and where the most skin in the game is, where people are actually putting their money on the line, it's far and away Ethereum, right? There is over $1 billion, I think, at the time I'm talking with you right now, locked in DeFi applications. There's 100 million ETH addresses, which are basically bank accounts on the network. It's pretty insane. But I think with that, you run into problems related to the user experience because these networks all run with fees, right? You need fees in order to ensure that you're able to kind of pay for transactions on the network. And some blockchains don't have fees, and we can get into that in a second. But there's only so much capacity that the validators on a specific network have. And Ethereum right now, we're seeing so much demand for getting into the layer one of Ethereum that fees are actually, they've pretty much doubled and tripled over the last month. And it's starting to become a little bit tricky for users of these applications and developers who create these applications because if I'm using a loan platform and I'm only going to be interacting with it, call it twice a year, maybe to open the transaction and to close it at the end of the year, and it's for, say, a couple $1,000, then I don't care if it costs me $5 to do that. In fact, it's so cheap in the grand scheme of things. I'm actually happy to do it. But if I'm using an application, maybe that's like a game, where each action I have to pay a couple dollars to do those actions, I literally cannot. That makes it unusable, right? And so, I think what we're slowly finding is that we need a new piece of infrastructure to complement the Ethereum ecosystem in a way that that supports low or no fees and higher kind of throughput, scalability, and performance. And so that's kind of really where I see SKALE coming in. And I think a lot of people also wonder, so, why are there's so many different blockchain platforms out there? I don't know which one to use. Why is SKALE the best, like, sister chain basically to Ethereum? And it's really, I think it comes down to the compatibility, right? The fact that you can deploy your contracts, which would work on Ethereum, onto SKALE with just a couple of, like, 2 lines of code change. And that you guys are always going to support the EVM in the like most recent upgrade. That's important. That's important for people who don't want to learn new systems. And so, yeah, I think it's like a whole mishmash of factors, but it's the fees, it's the UX, and that's going to have like relief in the near term for different applications. But long term, we talk about these emergent applications that can be built when you have a sister chain like this. The idea is it gets really big.
Yeah, yeah, it's and to speak a little more to that, the SKALE network actually is even built into Ethereum, and so all of the stake and the inflation that comes to help pay validators, and if you pay for a chain, all that actually lives and happens on Ethereum, which it's an amazing way to add more value and financial lockup in the Ethereum network as well.
Totally, I actually think that model, right, where you guys have SKALE Manager, which is the set of smart contracts running on ETH, that is a model that dApps are going to start to use, which is you put the mission critical core pieces of infrastructure on the most secure, expressive layer 1 blockchain in the world. And then everything else, you have to make trade-offs, and you put it on what kind of supports the high throughput, the performance, and still getting that level of security, but not as much as like bank grade, basically. And by the way, that's a totally worthwhile trade-off. There are reasons that you put things on a sidechain or layer 2. And so I think you're totally right.
So an interesting point here that or just perspective that I've been seeing. So you mentioned these new use cases, and so I want to just make sure everyone knows what's happening in gaming. And so I've been calling it the 3 layers of value, and which is a little contradictory towards like layer 1, layer 2. It's a different type of layer. Maybe I'll just say position. So position 1, the most common one that games use, and even other Web3 applications, is you just integrate digital money. There's digital money, and money can just pass through the system. You can pay for
Yeah.
things, but it's not connected to any logic. Okay, it's just like literally money can just go through this application. The second piece is when we integrate smart contracts, or second layer of value. And in that value, you get a little deeper because guess what? That money transfer can be connected to an action. And I can say, well, if Spencer beats Jack in the game, Spencer gets the money. And that's a very simple way. It could also be much more complicated and a lot more players and actors involved. But what it's saying is there's a data input that then releases the money towards one of the parties, okay? The third layer, the deepest layer, is when you can actually make the things that would say where the money goes on the blockchain. And this is where SKALE is seeing a lot of value, because people before said, no, just don't put anything on chain, just use money, and you have digital money, or hey, okay, maybe we can lock it up in an escrow. But at the end of the day, you're still trusting a server somewhere that can route the money wherever it wants, right? And the developers can change things. But people in crypto, they want something that's more decentralized. So let's think about a game of poker, right? You could actually have every single action and sequence mathematically built in to say this card set beats that card. We know that the deal was accurate, and everything that's happening in each play ends up being on the blockchain. Now, that doesn't work in today's Ethereum, because a game between 5 people might have like 10, for a whole night might have 10,000 draws, and you don't want to pay 10 cents times 10,000. But on SKALE, you're paying almost nothing per transaction. You're just paying
Yeah,
for bandwidth, right?
exactly. And I think this is the exact like kind of emergent use cases that SKALE brings, which is you literally cannot do this on layer 1. And this doesn't matter if there's ETH1 or ETH2, which we get tons of kind of parallel computation. We're still going to have fee markets. It's still going to be cost prohibitive. So you could either do nothing, or you could say, all right, let's think about this like my bank account in the real world. I have my bank, maybe I'm using Bank of America. I have dollars in that bank account. And when I want to go and use it, I take it out. Maybe I withdraw it from an ATM and I go play a game and I go do it. And then at the end of the day, I bring it back, whatever my winnings were, and I put them back in the bank account. This is the exact same thing happening on SKALE. So what that we're going from a slightly less trustworthy environment because it's so costly, right? You're paying for that security. We want to pay a little bit less for security so that we can do new use cases. And then we're done with that. We bring it back. And so it's just a perfectly natural kind of seamless connection that I think more developers need to realize that they can do this, right? You don't have to just use layer 2, or you don't have to just use layer 1. You can use both. And you can use a variety of different kind of architectures to serve the right user experience, because ultimately it's about your user.
Yeah. So I'd love to get your opinion on this. So if a new question, it seems like this is not, even amongst the Ethereum community, these emergent use cases and requirements for more scalable software is actually it's as if a lot of people are just not thinking about these things in nuanced fashions, and that these are all infrastructure that can be pooled and pieced together to create optimal flows. It's almost as if there's a religious dogma to the way things should work. I'm wondering if you could, do you think that's changing? Do you feel like the Ethereum ecosystem is maturing, please opine on that.
Yeah. So I think that it's definitely maturing, right? If you look at just the way that people value tokens these days, we're starting to be more rigorous in how we value these. And really, it comes down to revenue, right? If your token has fees or burning or some type of share, then I can use almost general legacy valuation approaches to come up with a reason for why your token should be at a specific value. And because of that, that's actually kind of made its way down to how entrepreneurs and developers are creating applications where they want to create something that people actually want to use. They want to kind of have a reason for their applications to be useful. And I think that developers are actually becoming a lot more just practical when it comes to creating applications. And the reason is because they want to see progress and they want to see traction. And that's ultimately how we kind of realize value in this space. and it's no longer about who has the best narrative. It's actually now about who has the best traction. And so developers, when they get on the ground floor and they realize that you can't actually do all of this on layer one, they begin to think about what are the solutions available to them to have them still realize this vision. And so I think that as more and more people get into the weeds, and this is something that I'm doing as an investor, I work with so many early stage founders. I see how they're creating their businesses that run on top of Ethereum. They have to make hard choices about where they want their applications to live and what parts of their applications they want to be on top of Ethereum, because the fees so meaningfully kind of affects the user experience. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see just an incredible kind of heterogeneous ecosystem of applications that are all leveraging their own unique scaling solutions. And it's a lot less dogmatic, I think. It is now, but it's going to get even more so over time.
Yeah, I've been using this term square pegging. It's when you're trying to like put a square peg into a round hole. It's just, it doesn't fit, and people keep trying. And one of the issues I think that we've had over the last couple of years in the ETH community and just more broadly in crypto is people are tied to, we're trying to create magic with user experience without changing any dynamics of how consensus or security or networks operate. And when Ethereum was launching, I remember like the Bitcoin maximalists were like, no, there can only be one. There can only be one blockchain. There can only be one currency. And I think we've seen pretty quickly that like there's tons of room for Ethereum and Bitcoin. And there's just room for the Ethereum ecosystem itself to grow and flourish. And we're going to eventually be trusting multiple networks. And so it just seems to me like, and hey, we've come up with some amazing research. But one of the balancing points is what's a user experience? And if we solve mathematical issues, but we create systems that aren't usable, we just only have 10,000 users a month. And so I don't know, it feels like this dogma is changing and people are actually, it's pragmatic. It's like, okay, what are my risks if I do this? What are the risks if I do that? How does this work? And the developer community seems to be completely just fact-based here, whereas more of the like armchair people are more emotionally driven.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is a good kind of example of just how like you guys just get Ethereum. I see you at all the different ETH Global events around the world too. You're the one who is staying up until 3, 4 a.m., like kind of long after I go to bed, by the way, and working with developers who are working all night. You guys see kind of their pain points. And I'm always impressed by just like the ability that you guys have had to kind of iterate on what SKALE is, because it's all about kind of the value proposition with developers. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see this community mature kind of right before our very eyes.
Yeah, and it's happening fast. So I think onboarding all the progress with API based wallets and just fiat on ramp. You're not going to have to mess around with your ledger every time you want to use an application. You can seamlessly integrate that, can connect to scaling infrastructure seamlessly. All this stuff's coming together. And I mean, we have 6 months left in 2020. I think 2020 has been very different than anyone projected. But where are we going to be in a year, Spencer? Any thoughts on where the Ethereum ecosystem is going to be in a year?
I think this is really interesting. I think as an investor, I have thoughts about this, and also just like kind of as a participant in the Ethereum ecosystem. Maybe I'll just start with like the investor take. I think the market is slowly starting to realize that the differences between these the kind of networks that have called themselves basically like ETH scalability solutions. So whether they're side chains or layer 2, these networks are functionally almost the exact same thing as ETH killers, right? And in a lot of ways, these ETH killers, which are next gen smart contract platforms that were really trying to get this, the consensus models correct and create their own amazing, programming languages and virtual machines, the list goes on. In a lot of ways, that is completely worse and not what the crypto developer ecosystem wants. the crypto developer ecosystem wants close and tight-knit compatibility with Ethereum. And so I actually think that, whereas you had a lot of these next-gen smart contract platforms trade, like they were, going to be the next Bitcoin. And this is not financial advice, but I could see that coming down to earth, and I could see the expectations relative to the Ethereum kind of scalability solutions being repriced kind of upward, those expectations, because people know that they're kind of functionally very, very similar. So it's really, really interesting times. And the reason is because no one's using these other platforms. Just no one cares. They get launched and they have no users, they have no transactions, they have no applications, they have no tokens, no stable coins, no oracles. Okay, maybe they get a couple, but with something like SKALE, you can basically port in everything from the Ethereum ecosystem seamlessly, right? That is a huge unlock for all the developers that I work with, all the entrepreneurs that we fund. They want something that they can use today. They don't care about something that can be the next Bitcoin in 2140, right? So I think from an investment perspective, I think a lot about that. And the space changes so quickly. And then in terms of the ecosystem, as we get all these different pieces of infrastructure in place, from the developer side, but also from related to infrastructure, things like on-ramps, wallets, we're getting really close to where, like my parents or non-crypto people can start to use these applications. And maybe they'll start to be DeFi, but they could supersede to other things in the future. But we are getting really close to that. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. We're almost there. We're pretty much there, but we're a few steps away. This year, I think a lot of these things are going to be going into practice and being rolled out, and we're going to start seeing more mass adoption. And then there's actually UX people working in the space now, which is nice to see.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. It's gotten so much better.
So Spencer, just want to say thank you. It's been amazing having you here, talking about, giving an insider perspective on where things are going. Any last thoughts to share before we close up today?
Yeah, I think one other aspect that I'd probably touch on, we look so much for this idea of community ownership in the crypto kind of projects that we invest in, because I really do think that's like a critical unlock. And a big piece of that is with respect to like the nodes and the validators who run on the network. And I think that's another thing to like really laser in on when people look at SKALE. The fact that you guys have made it so damn easy to become a validator, to run nodes, that is very meaningful, right? It's meaningful not just because, it like all networks need nodes. It's you can have more nodes, therefore be more decentralized and more censorship resistant and empower more people financially. Like the list kind of really goes on when you nail that validator experience. And so, yeah, I was just going to say, I wanted to make sure I brought that up because I don't think people realize how much work goes into the fine details of creating that. And there are so many, horror stories that I've heard, at least with other networks, where it's just impossible. It's impossible to run a node. And that's a big problem.
Yeah. So the way I've been talking about this, I think this is a great topic, by the way. So I ask people, so let's say you're starting an Uber or a Lyft competitor, or like a decentralized version. Let's just say that. So we need to figure out a way to make it a win for the drivers and the riders. And sometimes people in crypto think, oh, well, it just should be free and all these people should drive the cars. And it's like, no, we've got to have, it's a two-sided marketplace, that it's way more complex than a typical two-sided marketplace. And there's no central authority. And so then you say, well, how can I remove absolutely as much friction as possible and make sure the absolute best are working here? And so that's where all of these really advanced behavioral economics and economic modeling comes in, and all these things that eventually just get baked into a protocol. And And the reality is you have to make it a win for the supply side of the market. So developers are the number one thing. You need to have demand. We need to make it incredibly easy for devs to be able to use SKALE. And then guess what though? You have to have a business win for people to run validator nodes, and it helps the security. It helps, these things flourish. And so I think we're going to see a set of, like, I'd say hundreds initially of small to medium sized validator shops that are going to run just a handful of networks over the next couple of years. And they're going to be running ETH2, SKALE, and some other really amazing networks that are launching or have launched. And then, over time, that's going to flourish. It'll become more decentralized. But there's going to be, a few hundred of them that really, really make an impact on the world.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this is all just empowering individuals, right? It's no longer about these kind of massive companies. I think the key thing is that you have these crypto economic incentives that allow kind of resources to be allocated across people. And so, yeah, I'm just so really, really excited to see kind of what SKALE and Ethereum and other networks do as we move forward here. The future is very bright.
Well, and one other like really interesting point of color that I had a call today with one of the validators running the SKALE network. And so one of the big topics at first was, well, hey, what's the ROI? Because this is what it costs to run something on Amazon, and this is what the Google Cloud cost is. But you know what? What happens is people are incredibly innovative, and you would not believe all the small data, cloud providers, these cloud service providers that provide bare metal and colocation services and other services at a fraction of the cost of the major providers. So the decentralization ends up taking care of itself in a lot of ways, just by nature of, forcing functions of economics. So
right,
interesting.
It's an amazing kind of like market-based computation. It's truly efficient and global and permissionless.
So Spencer, amazing perspectives. I think if anyone's not following you on Twitter, they should be already. Can you tell people how to follow you and stay in touch?
Yeah, totally. So Spencer Noon on Twitter. I frequently open source almost all of my thoughts. Very transparent. And another thing that I think is probably worth flagging for readers is that about a half a year ago, I started a new newsletter called Our Network, and it's a newsletter about on-chain analytics, and basically what that means is how to understand the data that comes off these blockchains. Right? In 2014, 2013, when I first entered this space, everything was like big picture ideas. Like, how do we think about Bitcoin if it replaced the dollar, or what does it mean if countries use this? And it wasn't tied to reality. And what we're seeing now, especially for investors like me, is that the market demands having a pulse on what actually is happening, that reality. And that comes with data. And so what we've done is basically taken a bunch of different community members from all of the different networks out there, and they, on a weekly basis, submit kind of reports and analysis about what their respective blockchain networks are doing. And we'll be featuring SKALE very soon. It's a really good way to get smart from some like high level analysts and data scientists who are all dispersed all over the world. And it's absolutely free, which I think is like one of the coolest parts about crypto, which is we're just trying to make this thing better for everyone. And it's not as rent seeking as maybe it would be in traditional finance. So yeah, I wanted to quickly plug that because I think it's a good resource. But Jack, thanks so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
How do people sign up for Our Network?
Yeah, I've got a link in my Twitter bio. Yeah, so if you just go to Spencer Noon,
okay, great, and we'll also
on Twitter,
post the link to your Twitter and to sign up for the newsletter when we distribute this podcast. And I just want to say thanks. It's really fun and enjoyable experience talking to you every time. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Jack. Take care.